You never expect the deepest cut to come from someone who once kissed you like you were the only person alive. And yet, here I am, still hearing my daughter's voice in my head like it's an echo bouncing off the inside of my skull. Dad? I mean, he's my real dad now. She didn't mean it to wound me. She's 12, too young to fully grasp how words can sometimes become knives. But the way she said it, softly, without hesitation, told me it wasn't a slip of the tongue. Someone had been planting that seed for a while. Her mother, my ex-wife, and the he in question, her new husband, Mark. When Sophie was born, I thought I had life figured out. Her tiny fingers wrapped around mine in that hospital room, and something in me just shifted. I wasn't just living for myself anymore. Every decision, every late night at work, every careful choice about money, it all circled back to her. Her mother, Claire, and I split when Sophie was 6. We told her all the right things. That we still loved her. That the divorce wasn't her fault. That we'd always be her parents. But the truth is, when Claire remarried 2 years later, the balance began to tilt. At first, I didn't mind Sophie talking about Mark. Mark took me to the zoo. Mark showed me how to ride without training wheels. It was fine. I wanted her to feel loved in both homes. Then the tone shifted. Little things. Like when she started calling their house home and my apartment Dad's place. Or when she stopped telling me she missed me when she left. And then, that day in my car, when she called him her real dad. I drove in silence after she said it. I didn't trust my voice not to crack. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly I could feel my pulse in my palms. Mark, real dad. The man who'd been in her life for 4 years. The man who'd stepped into a role I had fought for every single day since the divorce. The man Claire now praised like he'd rescued Sophie from some tragic void I had left behind. I knew then something was going to change. Here's the thing about money. You don't realize how much power it has until you decide to stop using it the way people expect. When Sophie was born, I opened a college fund for her. Every paycheck, a slice went straight into that account. Through good years, lean years, and the divorce, I never touched it. It was for her future, and I was determined nothing, not my heartbreak, not Claire's choices, would get in the way of that. Claire knew about the fund. I'd even told her the rough figure once. More than enough to cover a good university, maybe even grad school if Sophie wanted. After she married Mark, I noticed Claire became casual when talking about Sophie's future. She'd say things like, "Mark and I will handle college when the time comes," or, "You've done enough. You should think about yourself now." At first, I brushed it off. But then came the moment in my car. Real dad. That's when it clicked for me. If Sophie, and by extension, Claire, saw Mark as the father figure, then maybe he should carry that responsibility. Maybe it was time I stopped being the invisible safety net no one acknowledged. But here's the truth I haven't told anyone. It wasn't spite. Not entirely. It was survival. Since the divorce, I'd been living in the shadow of the life I used to have. The house went to Claire. Most of the friends chose sides and didn't choose mine. My career kept me afloat, but it didn't light me up the way it used to. I was stuck in a loop. Work, pick up Sophie, drop her off, eat dinner alone, repeat. There was a dream I'd tucked away in a corner of my mind years ago. A trip I'd promised myself I'd take someday. A real, no responsibilities, no deadlines, no guilt kind of trip. 3 months traveling through places I'd only ever seen on postcards. The Greek islands, the Amalfi Coast, small fishing towns in Japan, winding trains through the Swiss Alps. I always said I'd do it when the time was right. But the time never came. There was always something. Mortgage, bills, Sophie's school tuition, a busted water heater, Claire needing extra for emergencies. That college fund, it could buy me freedom. And after hearing my daughter call another man her real dad, I realized I might finally be allowed to take it. The night I made the decision, I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the spreadsheet. The numbers looked different now. Not as Sophie's future. She had Mark and Claire for that. But as my way out of the purgatory I'd been living in. It didn't feel good, but it felt necessary. I thought about telling Sophie first. Explaining. But what would I say? "Sweetheart, since you think Mark is your real dad, he'll pay for college and daddy's going to drink wine in Italy instead?" No, that would be petty. I decided I'd keep it simple. When the time came, I'd tell Claire the fund was no longer available. I'd be polite, even apologetic. Let them figure out the rest. 2 weeks later, the opportunity fell into my lap. Claire called me out of the blue, her voice sweet but rehearsed. So, Mark and I have been looking at Sophie's future. We're thinking maybe she could do a summer prep program next year. You know, to get ahead for college. It's only about 8,000. You can pull it from the fund, right? I leaned back in my chair, watching the ceiling fan spin slowly. Claire, I said evenly, I've actually decided to close the fund. There was a pause, long enough that I could almost hear her brain trying to reframe what I'd just said. Close it? What do you mean close it? That money is for Sophie. It was, I replied. But I've been thinking, since you and Mark are planning her future together, it makes sense for him to handle it. I'm still here for Sophie in every other way, but that money, I'm using it for something personal. The silence on her end was different this time, sharper, like the pause before glass shatters. This is unbelievable, she finally said, her voice tightening. You're punishing her because of what she said. I'm not punishing anyone, I said, steady. I'm making a choice for my own life. You have the resources, Claire, and you have a husband she calls her real dad. Let him step up. She hung up without another word. That night, I booked my first ticket to Athens. And for the first time in years, I felt my chest loosen, like I could finally breathe without asking permission. I didn't know yet what the trip would mean for me, or how it would feel to walk streets where no one knew my name. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't going to fade into the background anymore. If Sophie was happy, that was enough. She didn't have to see me as the hero. She didn't even have to call me dad if she didn't want to. But I was going to start living like I mattered. The day I left for Athens, the sky over my city was a flat, cold gray. It felt like the perfect send-off, muted, unremarkable, like the version of me I was leaving behind. I packed light. One checked bag, one carry-on, one camera I hadn't touched in years. I deleted my work email from my phone at the gate. When the plane lifted off the runway, I realized it was the first time in a decade that I wasn't rushing to get somewhere I was needed. I was going where I wanted. Athens was heat and sound and color. The air was heavy with the smell of grilled meat, diesel, and sea salt. Stray cats wound between my legs at outdoor cafes. Every wall seemed to hold a layer of history under its peeling paint. The first night, I climbed a narrow street until the Acropolis came into view, glowing gold against the deep blue of the sky. I stood there for a long time, my hands in my pockets, feeling like I'd stepped into a postcard. It hit me then, how small my life had become after the divorce. Every day had been a careful routine, built to keep me from feeling the emptiness. And here I was, thousands of miles away, grinning like a kid just because I could smell baking bread from a shop down the street. From Athens, I ferried to Santorini. I rented a tiny room with a balcony overlooking the caldera. The first morning, I sat out there with coffee and watched the sun rise, slow, deliberate, turning the water from black to silver to gold. Something loosened in me that morning. I didn't have to check the clock. I didn't have to think about drop-offs or pickups or work calls. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was mine. In Italy, I stayed a week in Positano. The place looked fake at first, like someone had painted it too perfectly. Houses stacked in pastel layers, lemon trees leaning over stone walls, fishing boats bobbing like toys in the water. I learned to order coffee the Italian way, standing at the bar, drinking it in 2 sips. I swam in water so clear I could see the ripples on the sandy bottom. I let the salt dry on my skin before showering, just because I could. One night, I sat at a tiny table outside a trattoria, eating pasta with clams, when I heard a man at the next table laughing with his teenage daughter. The sound caught me off guard. It wasn't the laugh, it was her face. She was leaning toward him the way Sophie used to lean toward me when she was telling me something important. For the first time since I'd left home, I felt a small ache. I wondered what Sophie was doing right then. If she missed me at all. If she'd even noticed I was gone. Japan was next. I rode slow trains through mountain towns, my reflections sliding over rice fields and rivers. In Kanazawa, I stayed in a ryokan with paper walls and tatama floors. Every night, I soaked in an outdoor hot spring while snow drifted down from black skies. Something about Japan changed me in a quieter way. It was the pace, measured, intentional. People took time to place things just right. A teacup, a pair of shoes, a meal. No rush, no pretending time wasn't passing. I realized I'd spent years trying to control the clock, trying to squeeze everything into the narrow hours I had with Sophie, trying to make each moment prove I was a good father. But maybe that's not how love works. Maybe it's not about the grand gestures. Maybe it's about showing up when you can and letting go when you can't. In Switzerland, I boarded the Glacier Express, the train that snakes through the Alps like a silver ribbon. The windows were so big it felt like the mountains were leaning in to watch me. At one point, we crossed a bridge so high my stomach dropped. The view stretched forever. Snow peaks, frozen lakes, tiny villages tucked into valleys like they were hiding from the wind. I thought about Sophie again. About how small we are, really. How the things that feel impossible to forgive can sometimes shrink when you see them from far enough away. I didn't forgive Claire, not yet, but I started to see her less as the villain in my story and more as a person who had made her own choices, just like I was making mine. By the time I returned to the States, 3 months had passed. My skin was darker, my hair was longer, and I had a notebook full of small, perfect moments. The old man in Greece who taught me to play backgammon. The fisherman in Italy who let me steer his boat for 5 minutes. The Japanese innkeeper who bowed so low when I left that I felt my throat tighten. I had thought the trip would be about escape, but it turned out to be about return. Not to the life I'd had before, but to myself. Sophie was waiting when I landed. Claire had texted me a week before, saying Sophie wanted to see me. I didn't ask why. I just said yes. She was taller. Her hair was longer. She had that preteen mix of confidence and shyness, like she wasn't quite sure how to stand around me. "Hey," I said, kneeling so we were eye level. "Hey," she said back. Then, after a pause, "You were gone a long time." "Yeah," I nodded. I needed some time to figure things out. We walked to the baggage claim in silence, but it wasn't the awkward kind. I could feel her studying me, like she was trying to decide if I was the same dad she remembered. Over the next few weeks, she started coming by more. At first, it was short visits, an hour here, a dinner there. Then it was full weekends again. She'd ask about my trip, and I'd tell her small stories, not to impress her, but because she seemed to genuinely want to hear them. One night, we were sitting on my couch watching some cooking show, and she said it without looking at me. I didn't mean it, you know? About Mark being my real dad. I didn't answer right away. I just watched the TV as the chef plated some ridiculous dessert. "I know," I said finally. "And even if you did, I'd still be here." She leaned against me then, just enough for me to feel the weight of her head on my arm. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was a beginning. It's strange how the big moments in life don't always feel like big moments while they're happening. The real turning point wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some heated confrontation or tearful confession. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon in late spring, months after I'd come back from my trip. Sophie and I were sitting at my kitchen table, half a pizza between us. She was scrolling on her phone. I was flipping through a travel magazine I'd left there without thinking. A photo caught my eye, Santorini. The same blue domes and white walls I'd stood in front of that first week away. "Is that Greece?" she asked, leaning over to look. "Yeah," I said. "That's where I went after Athens." She studied the photo for a second, then set her phone down. "I think I'd like to go there someday." And just like that, something clicked in my chest. Not the sharp, defensive click I'd felt in the car when she called Mark her real dad. This was softer, like a door opening instead of one slamming shut. For weeks after that, I caught her asking little questions about my trip. Not in a forced way, more like she was circling around it, testing the water. "What was your favorite food? Did you really go on a train through the mountains? Were the beaches better in Italy or Greece?" I'd answer each one, careful not to oversell it. I didn't want this to become some contest with Mark. This was about her curiosity, not my ego. One evening, after I drove her back to Claire's, I sat in my car in their driveway for a minute. I could see them through the window, Mark laughing at something, Sophie shaking her head like she was pretending not to smile. It didn't hurt the way it used to. It didn't feel like something was being taken from me. Because I realized something in that moment. Sophie didn't need me to be her only dad for me to still matter. She just needed me to be steady. Someone she could come back to without worrying the door would be closed. About 2 months later, Claire called. I could hear the tension in her voice before she even spoke. "So, Sophie got into that summer prep program. It's more expensive than we thought." I was wondering. I cut in gently. "Claire, I told you before, that fund is gone. I can't help with tuition." There was a pause. Then, sharper. "You can't, or you won't." "Both," I said. "But she's your daughter too. And Mark's. I'm sure you'll figure it out." I could practically hear her jaw tightening on the other end. But I didn't backpedal. When we hung up, I didn't feel guilt. Not even a little. Because I'd already decided. If I was going to invest in Sophie's future, it wasn't going to be through a check I handed to someone else to spend. It was going to be through something I could give her myself. That summer, I booked 2 tickets. One adult, one child. Destination, Greece. When I told Sophie, she froze for a second, like she was trying to make sure she'd heard me right. Just us, she asked. Just us, I nodded. No prep program, no schoolwork. Just a trip. You and me. The smile she gave me right then. God, it had been years since I'd seen it. Pure, unguarded, the kind of smile that made her look like she was 6 again. Traveling with her was nothing like traveling alone. It was slower, messier, louder. She packed too much, wanted to stop for snacks every 2 hours, and took a million blurry photos of cats. But she also noticed things I would have walked right past, like the way the light turned the sea green instead of blue at sunset, or how the old woman at the bakery slipped her an extra piece of bread without charging her. In Santorini, we sat on the same balcony where I'd had coffee that first morning alone months before. This time, there were 2 mugs on the table and Sophie's laughter in the air. She asked me what it was like being there alone the first time. I told her the truth, that it had been beautiful, but also lonely, and that bringing her there made it feel complete. One night, we were walking back from dinner when she slipped her hand into mine. She didn't say anything at first, and I didn't push. We just walked like that, the sound of our steps mixing with the waves against the rocks below. Then she said it, so quietly I almost missed it. I'm glad you're my dad. No qualifiers. No comparisons. Just that. I swallowed hard, kept my voice steady. Me too, kiddo. When we got back home, nothing magically changed with Claire. She still bristled at me, still made subtle digs in conversation. Mark was still in the picture, and Sophie still cared about him. But none of that mattered as much anymore. Because Sophie and I had our own thing now. Our own stories, our own moments, our own memories that no one else was part of. And I finally understood what that trip, the first one, the one I'd taken alone, had really given me. It wasn't just a break from my old life. It was the reminder that I could choose how to spend my time, my energy, my money. That I didn't have to keep bleeding myself dry for people who didn't see me. The last page of my travel notebook has just one line, written the night before Sophie and I flew home from Greece. Sometimes the best investment isn't in their future, it's in the time you spend with them now. The college fund is still gone. Mark ended up paying for the prep program, and I'm sure he'll help with college too. That's fine. That's his role to play. Mine is to be the one Sophie thinks of when she sees the sun coming up over the sea, or smells bread baking in the morning, or hears waves hitting the shore at night. Mine is to make sure she never doubts that she has 2 real dads, just in different ways. And mine is to finally live a life where I can smile again, not because I got even, but because I got free.